Good morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. To all those of you who are joining us on our streaming online service. My name is Helen Foss, and I'm delighted to welcome you today in my role as worship associate. Welcome to you all, no matter the hue of your skin, the origin of your ethnicity. Welcome whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. You are welcome.
I'll just set it up here.
If you are new to First Unitarian, I invite you to check out our website, firstuuwilm.org, to learn more about us and to sign up for our email newsletter. Those of you who are receiving our e-news learned on Friday that we will be having worship online only throughout the month of February, hoping to reopen in March. Stay tuned. Our guest minister this morning is the Reverend Dr. Robert Hardies, who has most recently served for 19 years as the senior minister at All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C., with its 800 plus members of an extremely diverse and dynamic congregation. Reverend Hardy's tenure at All Souls was bookended by 9/11, he started 2 days before, and the pandemic. During his ministry there, he helped create organizations that advocated for marriage equality and for voting rights. In fact, the Washington, D.C. Marriage Equality Act was signed in the church sanctuary in recognition of their leadership role. For this church year, Reverend Rob is serving as the minister of the UU Society of Martha's Vineyard, and continuing to actively use this time as an experienced leader of retreats and pilgrimages. He was to have led a wonderful retreat here at First Unitarian just yesterday with Reverend Larry, but with the snow, it was postponed to February 26th, when we are now looking forward to welcoming him in person. And listen to what else he's been up to. He's organizing a 5-day pilgrimage to Walden Pond on behalf of a group of the Potomac Partnership of UU congregations. Yes, the Walden Pond of one of our UU forefathers, Henry David Thoreau. In the face of the climate crisis, with many of us struggling with grief, anxiety, despair, and powerlessness, Reverend Hardy's pilgrimage will share wisdom and practices that connect us to our love for the earth, cultivate hope and resilience, and empower us to take action to address the climate change. Following in Thoreau's footsteps, each day they will walk a different journey through the Walden Woods ecosystem and complement the walking with spiritual reflection, drawing upon Thoreau's life and writings, other Unitarians and transcendental friends, as well as wisdom from contemporary environmental thinkers and activists. I look forward to hearing more from Reverend Rob this morning, especially his message of hope and resilience as we move forward. Reverend Hardies lives with his husband and son in Washington, D.C. My husband and I first heard Reverend Rob preach at UU General Assembly in Fort Worth in 2005, and he knocked our socks off. So much so, I never forgot his name and was just thrilled to know he would be joining us from the virtual pulpit last July and now again today. We're delighted to have you with us, Reverend Rob, and look forward to hearing your most important message. And now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning, friends. It's so good to worship with you this morning. I want to thank you, Helen, for your very kind introduction. And also to thank my good friend and colleague, Larry Piers, for inviting me to preach this morning. I'm just so happy that you all and Larry have found one another in this interim time. I know from personal experience that he has a lot of wisdom and grace to offer. Friends, our call to worship this morning is adapted from the Reverend Gary Kowalski. With faith to face our challenges, with love that casts out fear, with hope to trust tomorrow, let us receive this day as the gift that it is. Come, let us worship together.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it. We are all flames. When we gather hand in hand, our church, our community, our home, we inspire, we celebrate, we come together sharing our light of hope for the shared future.
My blood doth rise to the roots of yon oak, her sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end. My sight as deep as the sea, beating my heart as the measures of hope that love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Winging my song is the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
So when I lived in Boston, I served a church that was right downtown in the Back Bay area of Boston. And one day I visited a member of the church, Pauline, who just lived a few blocks away from the church. And when I arrived, she served some hot tea and some cookies. Now, I can't recall what kind of cookies, well, because I probably ate the cookies up so quickly that I'm not sure I actually looked at them first. During the course of our conversation, Pauline told me she was 89 years old. She shared with me some of the events of her life, where she had grown up, her family, and the work that she had done. And then she directed my attention to a big trunk, a large rectangular suitcase right there in her living room that also served as a small table. She pointed out the various stickers or decals on the trunk that represented many of the places that she had visited during her life. The trunk was almost covered with stickers representing all of those places. Whenever I went somewhere, Pauline said, I would often get one of these decals and stick it on the trunk so that I would remember where I had been. She continued, at my age, I don't travel that much anymore. However, sometimes I look at this trunk, I will look at some of those stickers, and I will remember the places where I have been. It brings me much joy to remember these experiences. She shared a few of those stories with me about her trips to the Grand Canyon, to California, to the Pacific Ocean, to Italy, to the Mediterranean Sea. And I began to notice something as we talked. She often emphasized the beauty of the natural world where she had visited. Mountains and sunrises and oceans and canyons and tall old trees and beautiful blue seas. As she talked, a smile would come over her face and her eyes would stare as if she was experiencing that place once more. As she described these experiences to me, it was almost as if we were taking that trip again together. My guess is that she was experiencing delight because I was experiencing delight as she told me the stories. I love the beauty of nature, she said. For me, that beauty is the closest experience I have had of God. I can't recall how long my visit was with Pauline. I do remember she asked me a few times, do you want another cookie? And I still don't remember what kind of cookies they were. But you know, as I tell you this story, I'm feeling some of that joy and delight that I experienced as she shared her stories and pointed to the stickers on the trunk in her living room that also served as a small table. Do you recall a place where you have been, where you've experienced beauty and wonder at nature? Maybe you could write those briefly in the chat if you would like. This morning in our service, Reverend Rob Hardies, a longtime friend of mine, welcome Rob, will be sharing in his sermon about the importance of cherishing our earth and about a man who also loved nature and saw nature as a place where we could have experiences of something holy. This man, Henry David Thoreau, did not have a big trunk with stickers on it as far as I know, but he did collect his experiences by writing them down in a book, a journal. And Henry David Thoreau also often took long, slow walks within nature, not just to get somewhere, but to be open to the experiences of beauty, wonder, and delight along the way. When he wrote down these experiences in his journal, he often relived and savored the experience as if he was as he was writing. And he felt a sense of even what he felt was well-being or health in himself by doing so. As others read what Thoreau wrote more than 150 years ago in his journals, they too often experience some of the delight and the wonder that Thoreau experienced, just like I experienced delight when Pauline told me her stories about the stickers on her trunk. Do you have a wonder book? A place where you can write down or draw some of your experiences that make you stop and stare and wonder? This is my wonder book or journal. I really like it because it has a place for my pen to go right on the side and a place to kind of hold the pages together, particularly if I put objects in the book. Do you ever take a walk in nature just to enjoy the beauty around you? So maybe you don't have a big trunk with stickers on it like Pauline, but do you have your own wonder box where you collect objects that are special for you, stones and shells and leaves? Thoreau felt that each of these objects from nature could remind us of something holy, what some of us call God. So maybe this week you can find or create a wonder book of your own, or a wonder box for yourself. As I finish my conversation with you this morning, I'm reminded of this poem called Leisure. It's a poem that's also included as a song in our Unitarian Universalist hymnal, as a reminder to us, a reminder to pause for wonder, to enjoy the beauty and the wonder and the awe of nature all around us. It goes this way. What is this life full of care? We have no time to stand and stare, no time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep or cows. No time to see when woods we pass, where squirrels hide their nuts in grass. No time to see in broad daylight, streams full of stars like skies at night. No time to turn at beauty's glance and watch her feet, how they can dance.
Thank you, Larry, for introducing us to the Wonder Book. Friends, I want to invite us now to open up some time and space in our service and in our hearts for meditation or prayer. So wherever you are at home now, you might just find a position that is both comfortable for you and attentive. And why don't we begin by just taking a couple of breaths, a couple of slow, deep breaths. Allowing our attentive presence to deepen with each breath. If you like, you may close your eyes. And keep breathing as we listen to these words of meditation from the poet Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Friends, let us rest for a moment now in the grace of the world as we join together in silent meditation. And now I invite us to widen the circle of our loving attention by drawing into the embrace of our meditation the names of those who are on our hearts this morning, those who grieve, those who are ill, those about whom we are concerned or for whom we are grateful. Let us speak aloud those names now, or simply cherish them silently in our hearts. Friends, may all the names spoken, held silently, or written, shared in our chat, may they find peace, wholeness, and healing this day. Amen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our reading this morning is a poem by Denise Levertov. It's called Beginners. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet. There is too much broken that still must be mended. Too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. Friends, in the summer of 1845, Henry David Thoreau moved to a cabin he built beside Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, on a piece of land owned by his good friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The rest, as they say, is history. The story of Thoreau's 2-year retreat at the cabin, as told in his book, Walden, helped launch the modern environmental movement and has inspired generations of nature lovers all over the world. To this day, a visit to Walden has the power to connect us to this story and to the earth itself. But lately, I've been wondering if the story we tell of Thoreau at Walden, this story so important to American environmentalism and to Unitarian Universalism, I wonder if this story as currently told still serves us. As we face the existential threat of climate change, does it still serve us to tell a romantic story of a man who took some time out to get in touch with nature? Is that enough? Does that offer us any wisdom or insight as we face a potential climate catastrophe? I'm not so sure that it does. But what if we included in the story an important and shocking detail that often gets left out of the history books, which is that a year before he moved to his cabin at Walden, Thoreau, the great American nature lover, nearly destroyed the very forest with which his name is now synonymous. Well, now maybe we do have a story that can be of use of us then as we confront the climate crisis. What I'm suggesting is that if one of the world's most storied environmentalists started off by nearly burning down the forest that he is famous for loving, well, then maybe there's some hope for the rest of us too, and for our unclean hands and our complicit lives. Maybe there's hope that we can heal our broken relationship with the earth and tackle this climate crisis before it's too late. Thoreau's story offers us a parable, I believe, for how we might meet the challenge of climate change with spiritual resilience and moral agency. So let's go back and begin at the beginning of the story, why don't we? And see what it might reveal to us. On the last day of April 1844, shouts and cries echoed through the village of Concord, Massachusetts. Walden was burning. The name Walden refers to several hundred acres of forest land immediately adjacent to Concord. At the time, it was one of the last pristine woodlands remaining in the area. The people of Concord cherished Walden for its beauty and depended on it for their survival. After all, it was timber from the Walden forest that kept their home fires lit through the long New England winter. One of the first to raise the alarm that day was the very man who'd set the forest ablaze, Thoreau himself. Earlier that day, he and his friend Edward Hoare had set out on a camping and fishing trip. They hadn't gone far when they pulled ashore to make a lunch of some fish they'd caught. In a hollowed out tree stump by the river's edge, they started a campfire. Now, Thoreau was by then already an avid outdoorsman and had lit hundreds of campfires before, but it had been an unusually warm, dry April in Massachusetts, and a breeze blew sparks from the fire onto some nearby grass. The young men tried to stomp out the fire with their boots, but the wind kicked up and fanned the flames, sending them up a valley and into the woods. On the other side of those woods lay Concord itself, and the fire was headed straight for it. Thoreau describes in his journal the fear and panic that he and his friend experienced. We felt we had no control over the demonic creature to which we had given birth, he wrote. It went leaping and crackling wildly toward the wood. That's when the young men shouted the alarm and ran for help. But before help arrived, the forest billowed with fire and with dense clouds of smoke. Pine trees burst into flames, Thoreau wrote, as if they were made of gunpowder. Small animals fled the woods, and Thoreau himself struggled to keep ahead of the surging flames. At one point, they nearly consumed him. Soon, the people of Concord arrived, and together with Thoreau, battled the fire. They cut trenches with their hoes and set controlled burns. And by late afternoon, the fire was finally extinguished. But not before it had consumed more than 100 acres of mature pine, birch, and oak. Luckily, the village and its people were spared. When it was all over, at dusk, a shaken Thoreau walked back through the charred remains of the forest to the site of the campfire. It was as if he couldn't believe it had all started from there. But there was his fish, perfectly broiled in the hollowed out stump. Though disaster was averted, the fire was a costly and traumatic experience for the people of Concord, and many directed their anger at Thoreau. Town officials threatened him with prosecution, and for months his neighbors whispered behind his back, calling him names that he recorded in his journal. Damned rascal, careless flibbertigibbet, and a name that stung Thoreau for years to come because it was true. Woods burner. Thoreau's journals also reveal his own complicated emotional response to the damage that he'd done. His neighbors' name-calling provoked a prickly defensiveness. Who are these men who are said to be the owners of the woods? I know the woods better than them and should feel their loss more than any or all of them. Other times he tried to minimize the damage he'd done. I've set fire to the forest, but I've done no wrong therein. These flames are but consuming their natural food. In the end, though, Thoreau's defensiveness was merely a cover for his deep sense of remorse. I feel like a guilty person, he wrote. Nothing but shame and regret. Well, spring passed and summer came, and still Thoreau suffered both the reproach of his neighbors and the judgment of his conscience. What forgiveness he did find came from an unlikely source. In the spring, I burned over 100 acres, he wrote in his journal. But by midsummer, this space was clad in a fresher and more luxuriant green than the surrounding woods. Shall man then despair? Is he not a sprout land too? When neither his neighbors nor his conscience could forgive him, Thoreau found solace and even grace in the tender green new growth of the forest that just months earlier he'd burned to the ground. Within a year, Thoreau moved to his cabin in those very woods and began work on his environmental classic, Walden. So can you see, friends, how when we include the significant fact of the forest fire, that the story of Thoreau at Walden takes on a different tenor and character? In this light, it's hard not to see Thoreau's time at Walden, at least in part, as an act of atonement, an attempt to right a wrong, to repair and reclaim his relationship with the earth, and to move forward with resilience in the face of traumatic environmental loss. This is where I believe Thoreau's story can point to some practices that might help us in our own time of loss and broken relationship with the earth, in our own time of environmental crisis. So here are just a few practices that I would offer to you. First, like Thoreau, we must intentionally cultivate our love and gratitude for the earth. Thoreau had always been an avid nature lover. From childhood on, he had romped and roamed the Walden woods, but after the shock and grief of the fire, it's as if he needed a powerful reset in his relationship with the earth. That's when he built a cabin and made a retreat there for 2 years. During these years, Thoreau woke with the sun, bathed each morning in the waters of Walden Pond, and lived simply off the land. But that was just the beginning. As Larry mentioned earlier, another little known fact about Thoreau is that almost every day for the rest of his life, he walked the Walden woods for about 4 hours every afternoon. These walks weren't mere exercise. For Thoreau, they were an intentional spiritual practice and an effort to cultivate a grateful and loving attention to the earth, noticing its patterns and cycles. For instance, on his walks, Thoreau noticed the precise date that various plants and trees blossomed at Walden. He did this year after year. So thorough are his records that to this day, climate scientists use his data to track the effects of global warming on the forests of eastern Massachusetts. Now, few of us can set aside 2 years for a retreat in the woods. And who can spare 4 hours every day for an afternoon walk? But at a time when our relationship with the earth is broken, what steps might we take to reboot and rekindle our sense of connection and gratitude for the earth? Can we walk once a week? Or take one retreat a year? Thoreau's practice of careful attention to the world inspired me to recently take up birding with my young son, an activity where we can share our mutual love for the earth and cultivate an attention to small and vulnerable things. Now, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that such practices will save our planet, but I do believe that they will strengthen our will to save it. Rachel Carson once wrote, "Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts." And if you think about it, why would you even bother saving a planet whose beauty you had not known and savored? So find ways to cultivate your love and gratitude for the earth. The second practice I notice in Thoreau's story is the way that he tends to his pain and regret and converts those into spiritual resilience. Remember that in the wake of the fire, Thoreau experienced a range of kind of ugly feelings, from defensiveness and denial to remorse and shame. Throw in the ostracism he faced from his neighbors, and you could see how it would have been easy to just throw up his hands and walk away from Walden. In the face of our own climate disaster, we too struggle with powerful negative emotions. We might feel fearful and anxious about the future, or ashamed for the world we're leaving to our children and grandchildren, or overwhelmed by the enormity of the crisis. All of these feelings are a natural and understandable response to the loss that we're experiencing. And it's critical that we acknowledge them, because here's what we know about grief. When it goes unattended, then our souls become fragile and brittle. But when we attend to grief in a healthy way, our souls can become supple, compassionate, and resilient. Thich Nhat Hanh has said, "The most important thing we can do to save our planet is to hear within ourselves the sound of the earth crying." If we don't allow ourselves to feel deeply that pain and loss, then we're less likely to address the cause of that loss. I saw Thoreau use spiritual practices like journaling and nature walking to acknowledge and work through his pain rather than become paralyzed by it. By giving space to that pain, voice to that pain, he was able to convert his regret into resilience. I wonder, have you ever listened for the sound of the earth crying inside of you? How can we create space in our lives to attend productively to the anxiety, fear, and grief that we experience in the face of climate change? Let's stop our doom scrolling and instead cultivate our spirit's ability to bounce back with resilience. Now, friends, I want to close by saying that one final piece of wisdom that I glean from this little Walden parable is the imperative of solidarity. One of the most hopeful and redemptive moments in the story is when the people of Concord heed the alarm and respond by dropping everything and working together to put out the fire. When faced with a threat to their environment and to their very lives, they briefly chose solidarity. And it saved them and their community. Now, sadly, it seems the practice of solidarity quickly devolved into finger pointing and blame and recrimination. We would do well to check on our own tendencies in this regard, I think. When it comes to the climate crisis, how much time do we spend in our armchairs, pointing fingers and blaming? And how much time do we spend working with others to find meaningful solutions to the climate crisis? Because therein lies the difference between climate catastrophe and the promise of a livable future. Three years after the fire, and at the end of his 2-year retreat at Walden, Thoreau wrote words that reveal just how far he'd come in cultivating a hopeful and resilient spirit. Just how far his soul had bounced back from a devastating environmental loss. He wrote at the end of Walden, "I learned this, at least, by my experiment, that if we advance confidently in the direction of our dreams and endeavor to live the life which we have imagined, then we will meet with a success unexpected in common hours." Friends, let us move forward with hopeful and resilient spirits. Let us hold fast to our hopes for the future of our planet, so that working together, we may be met with a success that even we dared not dream. May it be so. And amen.
My blood doth rise to
For the seasons on
So much to think about this morning. My first thoughts with this morning's topic went to our UU seventh principle, the interdependent web of existence, and the challenge to each of us to be stewards for our earth. Then, since I knew we were going to be exploring spiritual disciplines, I turned to our UUA website and our 7 principles to see what else that might be relevant. And there was our 3rd principle, partly specifying acceptance of one another, but adding and encouraging spiritual growth in our congregations, with quotes from Reverend Rob Hardies, no less. Indefatigable Rob Hardies challenging us from all directions. This is one of the many reasons that I love this UU denomination, and specifically this church. My mind is continually challenged, my heart nourished, and my spirit is refreshed. Reflect for a moment with me all that this denomination and this church means to you. This is the time each Sunday that we ask you to translate that meaning into your financial contribution to sustain the work of our church, resources to support our wonderful staff and to keep the lights on and the building warm. Please consider the 3 ways to give chart on the side of your screen. Send a check in the mail to the Halstead address. Log on to the website, find the donation page, or download the new Vanco Faith Engagement app on your smartphone and find First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. Whatever you are able to give will be gratefully received. Please join me now in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It
Friends, it is time now, isn't it? It is time that we thrive. For the sake of our planet, for our children and grandchildren, for the sake of our own lives, let us learn in this great turning to lead and live in love. Go now in that love, friends, until we meet again. Amen.
A reminder now to stay on Zoom after the service for the virtual cafe. Now, if you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me now by extinguishing it. The chalice is now extinguished, but the light lives on in our minds and hearts and souls of each one of you. Carry the flame with you as you leave this place and share it with those you know, with those you love, and most especially with those you have yet to meet. So may it be.
So I believe now we're moving to our virtual cafe. Oh, great. No need to go anywhere. We're going to have a virtual cafe. And today there's no program per se, only a chance to reconnect with one another. And the way we'll do that is you'll be placed in some breakout rooms and you'll have a chance to connect with some people that you know and maybe someone you don't know. And that'll give you a chance to kind of say hello, even during this time when we're having to be virtual and only virtual during our worship services. So make it as much a coffee hour as you can. If you're needing to grab a cup of coffee, go ahead and do that. Or maybe you're having a virtual cup of coffee as well. And you might want to talk about the sermon, what the sermon gave you, what insights it gave you, what implications the sermon might have had for you or the service, and what continuing questions you might have. So insights, implications, or further inquiries for you. And you're going to be in 2 rounds. So you'll be randomly assigned to a breakout group. Show me your excitement by going like this. Random assignments. Okay. So it's like, what's going to happen? Who am I going to be with? Okay. So you'll have that